Hi, everybody. My name is Russell Zach, and I'm the head of revenue at Second Nature, a company that focuses on enabling professionals to become more confident and competent via AI powered role playing. And I'm joined today by some amazing panelists from the leaders in a variety of different sales tech. I'm going to have them go ahead and introduce themselves, and we're going to dive in to our session today, which is going to be exceptionally interesting, which is AI-powered sales and enhancing efficiency and personalization. And we're going to talk about not only the capabilities, but also the ethical concerns, as well as a view into the future by the panelists. So let's go and just do a quick introduction. Frank?
Yeah, great to see everyone today. I'm Frank Dale, EVP of Product at SalesLoft. I've been at SalesLoft for a little bit over 4 years now, joining after they acquired the company I founded, which is now the Deals and Forecast product there.
Terrific. Thanks, Frank. Melanie?
Hey everyone, I'm Melanie Flake, co-founder and CEO here at Speckit. We're a modern enablement platforms that delivers your enablement, knowledge, resources, answers directly in the tools that your reps need every day.
Excellent. And last but not least, from the West Coast, Howard.
I'm Howard Brown, founder and CEO of Revenue.io. I am a 4-time founder, and little known fact, I'm also a marriage and family therapist and used to be a clinician for over a decade.
Oh, wow, that's pretty cool. Maybe we could throw that into some of your responses today in the panel, Howard. So let's dive into two of the major topics we're going to use for our discussion today. And the first one is about integration and impact, which is how is integrating artificial intelligence into your sales process change the way that your organization operates? Give me an example. And Howard, I'd like to start with you, because I was looking at the Revenue.io materials, and there was a pretty interesting quote. One of your customers stated, Revenue.io is so powerful, I built a team around the tool. So tell me, what do you think about building a team around AI?
Well, I haven't seen that particular quote, but I love it. Look, for me, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm very much focused on human behavior. All of the products and services I've built in my career is to improve human behavior. And sales and revenue generation is just another aspect. We all talk about behavioral change. How do we use technology today to improve performance of your revenue team so that they can deliver the best possible customer experience? So if we're not focused on actually that human connection and using AI to deliver a better human experience, then we're probably missing the mark. For me, the idea of studying what actually builds relationships, what builds rapport, and what negatively impacts a relationship is paramount to any sort of relationship, any buying experience. And when I think about AI, I think it's really important to differentiate AI, which has been around for decades, and probably a decade in sales tech, and generative AI. If you think about AI generally, it's about recognizing patterns, right? Using machines to recognize patterns and provide that next best action, what's important in terms of prioritization, and even some task completion. What everybody is so excited about right now is generative AI. It's the ability to not just recognize patterns, but then be creative with those patterns, create something and deliver a better experience based on that information, that data. So we talk a lot about augmenting human intelligence. That is what generative AI should be and could be. So that's what we're excited about. And that's where I really see using not only AI, which we've been using since 2017, but really generative is the next phase to really help people in the moment be better, deliver better experiences.
That's great. And when you bring up deliver better experiences, and are you augmenting the experience on the other end of the individual who's actually seeing or experiencing the generative AI capabilities? Frank, for you, how has it changed the development priorities at SalesLoft? What percentage is focused around AI development? And have you done something like an A/B test, like Howard said, which is, can someone tell the difference between an AI-generated SalesLoft message and a human-generated SalesLoft message?
Those are great questions, and I want to build on what Howard shared. So I am 100% aligned with him that at the end of the day, it is about connecting with other people. Like that, like full stop. It is about connecting with other people. And so when we think about AI or technology in general, the goal should be to empower the human. And sales at the end of the day is always about a relationship. It is one human connecting with another to solve a problem. And the technology's job is just to make that easier to do. And so we're in an interesting moment in time in that if you look at how technology tends to evolve, one of my favorite quotes comes from Benedict Evans. And he said, first, he was paraphrasing Marshall McLuhan. He said, first, the workflows match the tools match the workflows. And then eventually the workflows match the tools. And so what that means is we are evolving from where sales technology started, which is we just took all of the things you did in the physical world and we digitized them, right? Like Salesforce or any CRM is basically a digital Rolodex. That is it, right? When they started, they just took this analog world and it digitized it. Most of the early sales technology tools, they started that way as well. But where AI changes things is you can now look at a large class of problems, tasks that people used to do, and it changes the questions that you ask, because the question is no longer, should people be doing that? It's, do they need to do it at all? Like, does doing this actually give them more time with another human being, or does it not? And so when we look at our development from an AI perspective, we're really doing two things. We're evaluating every low value, manual, and repetitive workflow that someone might have to do. And we're asking the question, how much of that can be replaced so that the human spends more time with other humans, because that's what you want them to do. Right now, sellers only spend 20 to 30% of their time engaging with another human. And that's got to change. So in our world, at least 60% of our development is going towards AI. And what that looks like, we released a product called Rhythm last year. It is the first AI-powered workflow in our industry. It prioritizes which tasks sellers should take on, and it helps them basically be more effective throughout their day. And we're seeing results from that. We are seeing 2x higher contract values from people that use it. We're seeing a 20% decrease in sales cycle time. We are seeing a 25% increase in close rates and 39% higher productivity. And we define all of that around humans. How do we help the seller connect with another human? So whether it is traditional AI or it's generative AI, the goal is to get a human connected with another human and to remove as much friction as possible.
It's a really interesting way to put the positioning on where the product development priorities go, right? It's the experience first, the human contact first. Melanie, for you, a lot of what Speckit positions itself is bringing the content, bringing the enablement content to the place where the individual is working. How do you look at today, which is using AI in Speckit, but also integrated with all these other applications like Slack and Salesforce? How do you balance those two from a capabilities perspective?
Yeah, great question. The first thing I'll say is like what's been really fun, just echoing, even hearing some of the terminology being used like in the moment, right? Just in time, like just in time 5 years ago was a word we started using to describe like what we were trying to build. And like, I felt like I always had to be explaining the concept. Whereas like now it's common language, right? In the moment, meet reps where they're working. Like it's just become the expectation. I think that really just speaks to how quickly AI is really changing expectations, particularly when it comes to go-to-market tech. So when I think about how we're investing, just building, Frank, off of what you mentioned around, kind of how the first wave of GTM tech really just digitized kind of these old processes, right? Like you take file cabinets and manuals, how do you build a CMS, right? It's like tagging and metadata and all this kind of like these old structures that frankly were built around this idea that you needed to tag everything and organize everything for governance, for maintaining, for surfacing the right content. And I think in the future, frankly, like almost all of that can be automated away. So from like a technology standpoint, we're really looking similar to what Frank and Howard is saying. What are those jobs to be done both for the end user, right? And how we want to like ultimately make their experience better so that they can focus more on selling. But then also all of those jobs that RevOps, enablement, content folks are spending just to kind of get to that piece of content in front of the reps that we think can be automated away. So that's the part that really excites me and how we're really thinking critically around like, hey, we've got the end user, which for us is a sales rep or support call center agent, and really thinking about how can we remove the thinking that goes into what resource, what question, what sales collateral should I send and why, to, hey, based on this call, here's the resource that's the most relevant, or hey, based on where you're at in your onboarding journey or based on where you're at in your workflow, here's the answer or information that you need. So thinking about how can AI leveraging existing information in platforms like SalesLoft and others ultimately help recommend content, but then also just looking at like what are all those kind of jobs to be done that enablement folks are doing that are really taking away from like their core role of enabling, that's really just going towards that admin burden. And so both of those problems to me are really exciting and taking up a lot of kind of like my brain space in our innovation work.
Hey, Russell, I just want to jump in real quick because I think both Frank and Melanie spoke about some really important points around automating or creating next best actions. And maybe it's going to sound a little bit controversial, but I actually think that is AI 1.0. When you mention in the moment, look, we have developed technology that literally guides a rep through conversations based on what's being said and what's not being said, provides that rep with the content that drives a better outcome. And we've done that through close to 1 billion conversations, examining those from a psychological perspective. We actually, for the last 5 years, and we have 5 patents around real-time agent assist. So that was something we pioneered and created. And to see the results, we all talk about wanting to have more human connection and conversations. But everybody forgets about the fact, what am I going to do to make that rep better in the moment? Because at the end of the day, the most important thing is that interaction with the customer or prospect. We all forget about that person. The reason people don't want to talk to sales and support is because it's a bad experience. And we have changed the way we expect our sellers to behave, but we're not helping the sellers and our support reps in the moment deal with the expectations of buyers. And the reason buyers don't find value in those interactions is we're not giving our reps the tools to make them better. It's really hard to deliver a great customer experience if you're providing your rep a poor worker experience. So if we focus on giving our reps a better worker experience, not just by automation, but literally helping them in the moment, they will deliver a better customer experience, a better buyer's experience. And those companies that deploy that sort of technology will have better customer retention and will deliver more value, which is ultimately what revenue generation and revenue retention is all about. Sorry, I had to jump in.
No, that's good. It's great. That's purpose. But one thing, just for Frank and then Melanie, I'd like you to also comment is, Frank, tell me about something that you've seen in the field with the use of AI and the SalesLoft product, which has surprised you.
I would say just adoption, right? Because, if I think about the product that we released last year, which helps sellers know what is most important to do now, that is in many ways kind of a radical concept, right? Like if I walked up to you at a restaurant and said, hey, I'm going to tell you what is most important to do hour by hour all day long, you would tell me to go home. And yet the reality is it is enough of a problem for sellers, because if you think about their workday, there's so many things that come at them all day long that they've not only taken to it, but they love it. And so, we are living in a moment where I mean, I go back to one of the first things that I said, like the way that we work is changing. Now, the goals don't change. You heard Melanie talk about jobs to be done, and we use that framework as well. Like the objectives have not changed, but the way that we go about them has changed. You know, what do we need to do to get to that conversation? And then how am I successful in that conversation? All of that has evolved. I mean, my dad sold for 40 years, and I started my career in sales. The experience I had as a young seller in the early 2000s, or that my dad had for the majority of his career, doesn't exist anymore. It does not exist anymore. The only thing that is the same is that we want to have a conversation just like this one with people. That's it. Like, and that's the one thing that I think will not change.
And Melanie, what about you? Have you seen anything eye-opening from customer end use of some of the AI capabilities that Speckit has, or anything that you're planning?
I'll say some of what we are about to announce will be exciting on the recommendation front. I'd say for me, what's been the most interesting is looking at the number of use cases right now. When you think about the knowledge problem, the content problem, and really, Howard, you said, your worker experience. I've always said like your customer experience starts with your employee experience. Same thing, different words, but this idea that with the pace at which AI and technology development is advancing, like that's also meaning that all of us are creating products faster and rolling out products faster. Like the amount of change, the competitive landscape is changing faster. Like the amount of information that a single support agent or rep needs to master now probably looks nothing compared to, Frank, when you were mentioning 20 years ago, the kinds of objections, the kind of competitive knowledge and product knowledge that you needed to have. And so I think just the pace of change and the overload of information has made the need for, okay, what information do they need to know right now? Because I always say, like, it's not that your reps don't care. They just don't care until they do, right? So like, how can we make sure that information is there? But from a use case standpoint, obviously change management's been a really big growing one for us, but call centers too. Now, my vision was always like, eventually every employee is going to use just-in-time, information, of course, but the pace at which the call center use case has grown for us, and the problems there that still are being solved. And frankly, what's been fun there is how AI is really, I think a lot of the AI is focused on like the website chatbot experience and how can like customers self-serve, but there's still a lot of jobs to be done by call center agents that can be optimized too. And so we're really focused on that piece. It's like, okay, hey, when that ticket or that case comes in and like, it can't just be automated away, right? How can we make then that agent as productive as possible when it comes to the different systems they might need to go to and processes that they need to execute on? And that use case is really starting to spread pretty quickly.
Yeah, just to build on that too, I think what you're hearing from all three of us is that the demands on the modern frontline person, the person that engages with the buyer, are just greater, right? They're greater. I mean, we've talked for at least 15 or 16 years now about the empowered buyer. Like, they can go do research on their own. They can talk to people. They're networked in a way that they weren't before. But the reality is, like, that just keeps escalating. Like, we live in a world now where G2 Crowd exists, where you can use a vendor management solution like Tropic or Vendor that will tell you how the other party prices, negotiates. I mean, they know so much more about you that the sales experience, the frontline experience has to just be elevated in a way that it didn't in the past. And that puts a lot of stress on the person trying to deliver that experience. And that's really where AI and the types of technology we're talking about shine, because it elevates the human to do the thing that they're best at in the moment. It prepares them. It helps them with the right way to answer questions, how to respond in the moment, so that they can deliver the experience that wins. Because at the end of the day, that's why the buyer buys, right? They buy because they trust you. And you develop trust by delivering a consistent, high quality experience.
And I want to pile on, because when you think about the actual scenario of a seller today, imagine a seller is selling a product into Frank. Frank's an EVP of product. He's had years of experience. You bring a new rep in who's trying to sell Frank a product. Frank understands everything about the ecosystem. He understands everything about his product. He understands everything about the problems his business faces. He understands about all the competitive landscape because that's what he does. And now you're asking a rep to reach out to Frank to offer Frank a product, right? And that person is supposed to talk to Frank, add value to Frank, know just about as much as Frank knows about his problems, and offer him a solution. That is not fair to your average sales rep. And that is what we are asking sales reps to do today, is reach out to Frank or Melody or you, Russell, or me, and sell us on something that they think we need based on some assumptions that they're making. It is unfair, and it's why we are changing the world of sales and the world of human interaction, because all of us today are talking about delivering a better experience, and utilizing technology to do that is critical. Again, if you're not doing it, if you're not employing this sort of technology, you will be left behind. It's not a matter of if, you have to. And the quicker companies realize that everybody's trying to do something generative and build their own thing, guess what? Allow the people who have been focused on this for a very long time to deliver that better experience so you can focus on your product and service.
Well, I want to continue on the thread by taking us into the next subject. Okay, we have our example. Frank knows everything about my product. Howard, you've given me an assignment. I've got to sell to Frank. But now I have all the information Frank has. I've gone and researched it. I know more information about Frank. I can look up in real time information about Frank. And I've got my hands on this information. Where are we from an ethical and moral perspective, right? In terms of the use of the data at hand by these individuals. Where does it start? Where does it need to stop? What are the issues that always need to be considered? So I don't know, Howard, if you want to now flip it around and give us a perspective on with that in mind, and then we could talk a little more.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, there's a couple components, and we could do an entire episode just on this. But when you think about ethical AI, there's two primary components. One is data. If you don't have data stored in a way that's completely contained, because you may have a lot of different companies using your product, that data is their data. Your customer's data is their data. And if you're using any of that data to improve your generative or your foundational LLM, that's not okay. So it's critically important to think about, yes, we all want to train and provide better results, but Frank's data is Frank's data.
Yeah.
And what we know about Frank and what we share about Frank, we need to be thinking about that at all times. So if we're not segmenting data and having data rules and compliance and HIPAA and Sarbanes, like all of those policies around data, we're going to miss the mark. And I'll tell you what's going to happen. People will stop trusting these things. People will not feel good, and the backlash will be huge. So I think that's a critical piece of it, is the data piece. The other is we have to think about how we augment human beings, not how we replace them. Because there is so much bias that we've seen in these LLMs that if you're not paying attention to that part of it, if we're simply going out there and expecting the artificial intelligence to replace the human, we're going to run into challenges and a backlash there as well. So if you're not thinking of the ethics, if you're not thinking about data, if you're not thinking about privacy as the foundation of everything you do, you're going to lose trust. And while as human beings, we've grown better at forgiving human beings for things they do, you become very, very reluctant to forgive a machine. So if the machine fails you, you're gonna lose faith in it. So I would say that I'm glad you asked the question. It should be the thing that all of us are thinking about at the outset of any of these experiments.
Melanie, for you, I'm a individual at an organization. I'm a salesperson, and I'm using Speckit. And Spec it, I need to go find some materials in the proposal document that I owe to a customer, and it pops up and it says, you should send this at 3 p.m. And I'm like, that's interesting. I'm at my desk right now. But the reason you make Spec it makes a recommendation because it knows I always go pick up my kids between 12 and 3. How ethical is that to use from a recommendation standpoint on the AI system?
Ooh, I love that. I love that you're thinking of potential use cases for that one. I have thought of the calendar integration. One I'll have to write down. So one, echoing what Howard said, I think, and I'm just coming out of myself doing like our 5 last security trainings yesterday for our upcoming SOC 2. So very relevant topic, right? How do you make sure that internally you have the right protocols, policies, everything that you need to ensure that ultimately your customers' data is trusted, is important. When I think about, feeding our own recommendations engine, for example, right? I think one of the dangers, and we're seeing it with the recent fiasco with Gemini, right? Around like the actual LLM itself and the responses is that, as everything becomes kind of this co-pilot era that we're entering, where every tool is going to have their own kind of chat interface that reps can engage with, whether it's looking for that proposal or whatever it is, the expectation is that answer is going to be correct. Like the expectation from the end user is that whatever is being recommended to them is going to be accurate. And I think that's really where we hold the responsibility of thinking about like, what is that middle layer of governance? And that's something that I'm thinking a lot from a content standpoint. And what are the capabilities that we need to build in to ensure that answer is correct, right? And now there's the actual like model itself. But for us, for example, as we think about ingesting content, for example, from different places, right? Google Drive, SharePoint, or even let's say calls from SalesLoft as an example, right? How do we ensure that the right information, like how do we think about relevancy? How do we think about how up to date that information is? Like there are so many pieces that are problems that companies face today, right? But the expectation is going to dramatically change when it's like, wait, I'm getting this recommended to me. I thought I was supposed to do this because SpecIt told me to, or I thought I could send this to my customer because SpecIt recommended it to me. Like that responsibility becomes on us to make sure that those recommendations are correct. And even though the resource recommended might be out of date, right? It's still SpecIt that recommended it. So I believe that it's our responsibility and for every technology company to identify like where are those failure points and where your software could ultimately lead the seller down the wrong route, because there's nothing that's going to make them lose more confidence, right? Like Frank, if you're recommending the wrong order of workflows that should be prioritized, and it's like, wait, crap, I had that. I became so accustomed to using Rhythm, let's say, to manage my day, and it recommended these like low-level tasks when I should have been preparing for my conversation with Howard later today. And now I've got 30 minutes to prepare for my CEO conversation. So I think that that's really where I feel the most ethical responsibility is like making sure that we're getting really crystal clear on like where are the potential failure points and where that expectation from the rep, like we should assume to meet consumer level expectations. And we need to identify like where those failure points are and where our software could like lead them the wrong direction. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about.
And Frank, what about for SalesLoft from people lead products often have a grounding principle, right? In how they develop their products. How are the ethics and the data management principles built into SalesLoft's development process?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about this. So fun fact, I have a master's degree in ethics, which I did before I got into business, which is not common. So we do think about that very deeply. And one of the ways that we do it is, and Howard touched on this a little bit, like you have to think about the data first because the data drives the model. And so one of the questions you have to ask is, how do we remove the wrong kind of bias from the model? So in our case, we do a lot of pre-processing of the data. We remove anything that could give someone a clue to like gender, nationality, anything like that could bias the model in the wrong way, right? Because the goal of the model is to provide a recommendation, and it has to provide a recommendation that also reflects the kind of world that we want to live in. Because the nice thing that we can do here as technologists is we have a choice about the world that we create, and we can choose to create a world that we want to live in, or we can kind of choose to create a bit of a hellscape. And I would prefer to create a world where we enable humans and we lift them up and we help them build authentic connections with the people that they're trying to serve. And so if you build the model in the right way, you're doing that where you're respecting both the person that the seller is going to go serve, but you're also respecting the seller and you're treating them with worth. And so I think one of the things that you've heard both from Melanie and Howard as well is that our orientation, at least for the three of us, is human in the loop. Like, we believe humans have dignity, worth, and value, and we are building systems to enable the human to do what they're uniquely best at. And through the long arc of technology, you go all the way back to the Industrial Revolution to today, that is generally what technology does. It very rarely actually replaces humans. What it does do is it will replace some tasks that they were doing, and it then enables the human to take the higher level things that a human is best for. So we build with that in mind.
That's good. That's great. I want to take some time and do talk about some futurism here. I'm going to pose one statement. I'm going to give it to one of the three of you. If you don't want to answer, you can pass and pick the person you want to pass it to. So the first one is going to be for you, Howard. Future prediction number 1. In an online negotiation, real-time AI analysis will include a feature for sellers to notify if someone is bluffing.
So we are testing that right now. And so, yes, we can do that based on a bunch of factors, including sentiment detection, speed. We also have technology that can observe how people are staring at the camera, have a few patents on that as well. It's only going to be, look, we don't have, to be honest, we don't have enough data. That at the end of the day, I mean, I have 510 terabytes of conversation data, and it's not enough, because what's honest very much depends on culture, where in the world, like, things are very different. And so to come up with a yes, we can do it, the answer is no, we cannot do it right now. In the future, maybe, but it has to be. What's critical about all of this is context. We cannot
be accepted. Do you think it'll be something that'll be accepted?
I think it will be accepted, not in every situation. I think the context is critical. Me talking to Frank in this particular stage, and he's a procurement officer or something like that, then there are certain rules that you can apply and use AI for. But let me get back to an important point. We're all talking about ethics in AI. If I can't look at the source data, so if I make a recommendation and I can't show the articles, or I can't show why I'm giving that recommendation, or why I think Frank is not telling the truth, and I can't click on and see, based on these factors, this is why I made this suggestion, then we're missing the mark again. So all of these things are fabulous, but we have to also provide the data underneath it. Otherwise, I'm not going to trust a machine to tell me that Frank's being honest or dishonest unless I have that data.
Yeah.
You know, it could be an interesting question too. Just Howard and Melanie, I'd love your thoughts on this. There's what we can do. So there's almost 3 questions here. There's like what you could do, what you should do, and then there's what are you going to be allowed to do? Because different jurisdictions are going to enable you to do more or less, right? Like, you go to Europe, some of the things that are okay in the United States from a technology standpoint, that's just out of bounds. So I'd be interested to hear what the two of you think.
I'll jump in quickly. I don't know, Melanie, I see you're still on mute, but there's also a fourth thing, is what you should not do. And I think that's critically important, what you should not do. And Frank, you mentioned training models for bias and that sort of thing. I actually would love to dig into that a little bit further, because who is deciding what is bias and what is okay is also biasing the model. So I think we have to be very careful of, when we tune things and try to move bias out, what is actually remaining. And the longer discussion, but I think that's super important too. Sometimes the very thing that we're trying to avoid, we're actually pushing in the wrong direction. So
Frank, just to add to that, something that we're spending a lot of time at, even as we think about, this recommendations engine that we're building, is like, who are the right best fit customers for that today, because we serve customers across a wide range of industries, right? Financial services and others, but there's a very different, there's regional risk tolerance that you're highlighting. And some of that also just comes down to the regulations. I grew up in Switzerland, very regulated, even on aspects like food compared to other places. But then there's also just by industry, right? And so like really getting clear on like who are going to be those best fit customers, those early adopters of certain types of technology, and what can we, really partner with them to learn from that then applies to others. That's just as we do the continuous work of ICP and persona refinement, right? Like that's playing a big role in terms of like, okay, what are the first use cases we're really optimizing for? Because yes, the recommendations engine in theory should serve every use case, whatever workflow you're in, but how do we really target it on the first ones that we believe we can sell to the customers that are going to have the appetite for it versus not? And so that's part of what's kind of influencing like really the order of operations that we're taking on our roadmap and how we're approaching it.
That's great. Let's continue the next one. This one is for Frank. We're in 3, 4, 5 years from now, and there's a situation. I'm managing Frank, Howard, and Melanie as my sales team. The AI is telling a variety of priorities of what you need to work on to close your deals. I'm your sales manager, and I disagree with the recommendations that the AI is making. It's telling you to work on one thing, but I think you should be working on another because you have 35 years of experience. How do you handle the situation?
Well, I would say two things here. So let me preface this comment with, we're talking about sales, not a nuclear power plant. So if you're in something like a nuclear power plant, I would say probably you're going to do what the system says. Given that we are talking about humans, and right, you heard Howard talk about all of the data that they have collected, and yet it's perhaps still not quite enough. And I think that's true across almost every one of these models, because there's still a large universe of things that you won't see, no matter how good your system is or how much data you collect. There's still things that you don't know. So if even we are talking 30, 35 years from now, I think you allow the manager to make the call. You inform the manager, you give them the best information possible, and then you track it. And if the manager is wrong, there's a feedback loop there. And we go back to the manager and we say, hey, turns out that was actually a bad play here. So next time we see this, we really recommend path A, and here's why. But the manager is always going to know something. And I'll give you a really tactical example, right? I will join some of our pipeline review meetings because they're just like my customers. So it's always fun to kind of go to those things. There are deals where our revenue leader will say, hey, I know that's coming in, even though the model says it's not, because I used to work with so-and-so. They know the person in procurement, and they told me it's coming in. Our system's never going to know that. And why would I want to override the human in that situation? So you always want the human in the loop. Over time, the system's going to get better. But I think you need to give humans the right to say, hey, I know something the system doesn't. And then we create a feedback loop. And if the human's wrong, sales is ultimately, even though it's our livelihood, a lower risk use case than a nuclear power plant. I think that's a safe call.
Yeah. So we still give the keys to the human to turn off the power plant. Good idea. Yeah.
I'd love to pop in on this one too. So for us, we currently do have the ability for, we don't just coach the reps, we actually coach the managers. Because I think what most people forget is most sales managers or sales leaders, they were like great reps that decided they didn't want to travel as much. So now they're a sales leader. It is a very different role than a sales coach or someone who has experience and education around training. So I compare it to if you've ever played golf and you go to a golf pro, and the golf pro tells you 7 things you need to do about how to improve your golf game. You know what happens to your game? It blows up, right? Because now you're focused on so many different things. But listen, a lot of great sales reps become sales trainers or leaders. They don't know that They just gave that rep 7 things to think about. Now it's unnatural. So we have to pay attention not just to the guidance that we give the rep, but the guidance that we give the managers and show the results of that coaching. Because look, just like evidence for the rep, we have to have the evidence for the manager, because a manager hopefully wants to get better in the same way as a rep does. So yes, they have the ability to override always, but it's also important, if we're not helping our managers be better coaches, then we're missing a huge part of it. So I think the two are critical.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, let's get to the last one. This is for Melanie. The year is, let's call it 2030, and you're a salesperson in a big negotiation, and the senior VP making the decision sends their AI to the final meeting, not themselves. The AI is programmed to answer and ask all the questions, but you don't feel super comfortable. What do you do?
These have been some hard-hitting questions. I'm impressed. Really creative. Man, I had not thought about that scenario, if I'm being completely honest. It's hard for me to imagine, because I feel like the negotiation aspect is such a human-to-human piece. Like, and I know that, you know, in large enterprises, you're often negotiating with procurement, which is far removed, and there's like very clear reasons as to why that's the case for them, right? It removes the emotional side of the negotiation, at least on their end, and puts them in a better position. I think it creates a little bit of a disadvantage, obviously, for the rep in that instance, because they have all the emotions. I don't know how I don't know if I have a good answer, to be completely honest with you, in terms of like what I do in that instance.
What about if I generalize a little more and say, I'm a sales rep and the company I'm trying to deal with keeps sending their AIs to my meeting, and I'm giving them presentations and I'm answering their questions, but I'm not really comfortable with them always sending this AI to represent me, because you can see some of this capability that Zoom and Teams are coming out with. You could see almost where it's going.
Well, and I've got a horror story there where, like, I was using one of those, the same tool that we use internally, but I was using it and I didn't realize it was joining all of my calls, like including the ones with like investors. And like that was recording, and like people were, you know, it got in the hands of the wrong people. So like there is like a danger with that aspect. And I know I'm talking to two folks that own those tools. I'm sure they've heard of similar horror stories happening. I, for that reason, actually don't record any of my calls I have with customers if I'm joining a rep or a CSM. But the aspect there is like, I want the customer to tell me like the real situation. Like when I get on a call with an exec, if the call recording thing is there, I know we're not going to have, like, Frank and I aren't going to get down to the bottom of like what's actually going on with SalesLoft and why they're not ready to move forward. Because there's certain things that Frank is not going to want to put on the record. And I think going back to the human to human piece, that relationship aspect, like there is still that off the record aspect that I believe is essential in preserving, at least at the level that I'm at. And so anyway, so I actually have no problem asking people to turn off the recording. I have, or vice versa, because I want to be able to be as authentic as possible. I want to be able to be as transparent as possible. And when we've had customers say, hey, do you mind turning it off? Like, I think that's the human element that we need to make sure that we have embedded in all of our technologies, right? For example, when we think about a recommendation engine, we want to build it across every app, but we're going to have the ability to turn it off. Like, hey, if you don't want it on your work lane, valid, right? You might not want us to be able to recommend content based off, you know, even though it might be helpful in replaying to the employee, there's might be some platforms that you're just not comfortable with. And I think that just comes back to the question of choice, right? With everything we're building, just like when I was talking about governance, how do you put the tools in your customers' hands to ultimately decide what they feel comfortable giving you or not? And I think that from our standpoint, that's how the mindset I want our reps having, even in interactions with our customers outside of our technology. So,
Melanie, you bring up a really interesting example with the financial institutions. So, as you know, obviously we have recording. It's a big part of our organization. We also have the same technology that can provide the same real-time notifications without recording the calls, which is really differentiated. But I will say that making sure you have a technology that also understands the context. So we also have financial institutions. Certain conversations are automatically recorded because the institution actually requires recordings. Other types of conversations that are not allowed to record or are uncomfortable. That's where you can actually use the rules engine underneath and an algorithm to drive that and then train which calls can and should be recorded and which ones should not. And the rep always has the ability to turn it off with a single click. I just want to point one thing out. Your question about a negotiation agent. So I think Microsoft back in 2016 had a patent around a negotiation agent. So that's been around for a long while. Google did an example about 9 months ago where they actually had a procurement officer and a rep, actually both were agents, negotiate, and they did it over a series of different examples, and they found that the negotiation actually worked out a better deal for both parties using the agent because it removed the ego factor and some of the emotionality. So that's a whole different crazy thing. Yeah. Imagine just letting the agents, the automated agents, actually negotiate and see if the companies can get better deals. Now, you're going out 2030.
And the legal terms.
Yeah, and you're going out 2030, but Google's showing examples of that right now, which is amazing.
Who is it? Chris Voss that teaches that or that wrote that book. I think going back to like the bias, like who's training that model? Like who are the individuals? And I'm sure Second Nature, you guys think all the time about like the different role playing models. Like I would love for my reps to be able to role play with Howard or Frank, frankly, when it comes to negotiations. So I feel like Second Nature has an opportunity on the procurement side. That's awesome.
So let's wind up here. We only have a couple more minutes. I just would love if Melanie, since you were the last to speak, if you could just give me a summary, your thoughts, your takeaways for the audience.
Oof, how long do I have now? I'm honestly, I think this is such a fun time. It's such a fun time to be an entrepreneur. It's such a fun time to be in product or working for a technology company. I know that it's been hard for most technology companies out there in this environment, right? It's hard to remind ourselves that like we are going through this shift that's larger than many of us can even comprehend. And so to me, one, it's really just an excitement for what's to come. Like I go back, I have our kickoff next week, and I'm actually using slides for my seed deck and my Series A deck from literally 5-6 years ago, where I was talking about this ideal of like, eventually we'll be able to recommend the content before they know it. And here, fast forward to, 5-6 years later, like we're in that time. And not only that, we didn't have to build all of it from scratch. Like there's new technologies on the market that we can leverage that can accelerate those efforts. And so to me, it's just really exciting. I think the question of governance, right? That rules engine you were mentioning, that's kind of what I was referring to. Like, what are those governance layers that each technology needs to think about for their own products and services is one that's going to become more of a central point of focus, and one that I hope that we can, as technology leaders, exchange notes on and learn. Like I wrote down a couple things that you all said. I think that we need more of those forums to discuss that. But in general, I'm just really excited. So that's where I'd leave it.
Frank?
Yeah, I'm 100% with her. I mean, and I think governance does matter. So like Howard, we do the same thing. Like we have a rules engine for recording. We do that for everything that we do. But I think what makes this moment exciting is things that you would have said are 10 or 15 years out, you can just go build right now. I mean, the kinds of things we're all building right now would have sounded like science fiction projects 5 years ago. And yet it is all very possible today with most of the generalizable AI models that are available now, the generative text models. I think if I were in the market right now, the biggest thing that I would be doing is I would go play with these things, like test them out, try to use them in your day-to-day, whether it's your personal life or it's your work life. Like that is the fastest way to begin to understand what is actually possible. And it will help you ask better questions so that when you decide whether or not to use one of these tools, you're doing it with a purpose. Because what you shouldn't do is use AI for the sake of AI. You need to use it with an objective in mind if you're doing it at work, right? There has to be a goal attached. Am I more effective in my job? Am I more efficient? Do we have better conversations? Like you need to have a strategy around that, because a lot is going to come at you pretty fast. And if you don't, it'll be easy to prioritize the wrong things.
Howard, why don't you wind it up for us?
Well, first of all, thank you for having this panel. It's great to be with these sort of leaders that are looking and building and creating things both for the advancement of humans and augmenting human intelligence, thinking about things like ethics and how we build, and as the cornerstone of everything that we do. For me, it's such an incredible time. I've been building in tech since 2018. That's no hair, right? You're all probably a lot younger than me, but I've never been more excited about what we're building. And if my end goal is two things. One, I want every single customer facing person who is using our technology, I want the people that they're talking to want to hire them, because they are the living embodiment of what we are building. The second thing is, I want every person who's using our technology, no matter where they go get another job, to say, I'm not going to work for your company unless you use this technology. If we all have that as our northern guiding light, that will make us better. That will make sure that we're all driving towards delivering that best for every one of our users. So thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
That's a great message, right, to end us off with, which is, it's about looking at the technology. It's about using it for the right purposes. It's about helping everyone pursue and move forward their careers, no matter what organization they're at. So everybody, thank you so much for your thoughts. Thank you, audience, for attending, and have a great rest of your day, evening, or morning.
Awesome. Thank you all. Have a good one.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.